My group members and I will be talking about the marginalization of Native American culture and curriculum.
For my slide, I did the topic of Native American history in textbooks. So I read a journal article called Native Americans in Elementary School Social Studies Textbooks. The introduction of the journal talks about how schools play a big part in shaping attitudes toward race, and one of the most important elements involved in shaping these attitudes are textbooks. If teachers don't have much background on the subject, they rely on the textbook heavily. So if a textbook is biased or if there is misinformation, that is transmitted to the students. The textbook that I'm talking about on my slide is on a study about how Native Americans are treated in textbooks. The study was based off of certain checkpoints like geography, population, Native American contributions, and education. For geography, they focused on two components, location of Native Americans and natural resources. The book did a good job about the location, but they mentioned the control of but they did not mention the control of natural resources by Native Americans. Population was given weak coverage. The book only talked about Native Americans today, but mentioned nothing about their history. For Native American contributions, the textbook treated the contributions very lightly. They didn't think it was important as other subjects. The book mentioned 7 topics of contributions from Native Americans like medicine, fruits and vegetables, words, devices, and ideas, and only fruits and vegetables were talked about. For the education topic, the talk of boarding school treatment towards Native Americans is completely skipped over, and they do not talk about the terrible encounters they had to face. When I learned about this topic this year, I was completely shocked and was so confused. Well, I've never heard about the topic, but now I know it's because it's not mentioned in textbooks. The language that was used in the textbooks were very harsh towards Native Americans, and they were called names like savage, fierce, and terrors. In the textbooks, a small number of Native Americans were in pictures with costumes, but more than half of the pictures had Native Americans barely dressed or naked. Many of the pictures did not include women working, and most of the pictures focused on just men. In conclusion, a lot of information was neglected in textbooks about Native American history, and biased attitudes are shaped by young students because they are not given the proper information they need.
About 3 out of every 10 Native students drop out of high school before graduating. This includes students in reservations as well as in cities. American Indian and Alaskan Native students have a dropout rate of twice the national average. This is the highest dropout rate of any United States ethnic or racial group. So why is this the case? Well, it has little to do with academic capability. Native students have needs that are simply not being met, and when they choose to protest the unfair treatment, these students are pushed out of schools. The educational needs of American Indian students are not met because they're in a system that fails to value their strengths, who they are, and where they come from. American Indian students are just like any other young group of people, but they are living in an area where they are constantly susceptible to stereotypes, biases, misconceptions, omissions, and even lies about their history and identity in textbooks, film, literature, music, and even politics. Cultural discontinuity is often a consequence of schools failing to recognize, appreciate, and even foster the Indigenous identity and culture of Native students. While their parents might be teaching Native heritage to their children, schools are creating this discontinuity between home and school. Drug and alcohol abuse are unfortunately a common symptom of Native students, with unresolved conflict between educators asking these students to give up their Native culture in school, encouraging these students to leave high school before graduating.
All right. So very often in textbooks and the curriculum, they portray Native American culture as very generalized and very insignificant and simple, and very more often than not gives the impression that their culture is not important. And more often than not, they kind of lump whole tribes together as the same thing, as they're all the same, like, people. Like, the whole tribes are the same, they speak the whole language, they have the same history, which is completely untrue. And also, they're often portrayed as savages or uncivilized in many textbooks. And because they're learning these in school, kids are often going to think, oh, this is true. These stereotypes are true and are often passed on to students. And to Native American students, it tells them that that's what their ancestors were. So this is what their family is. They're savages. They're uncivilized. And that can often lead to racism and many other things.
In order to destigmatize Indigenous culture, teachers must decolonize their curriculum. Decolonization is identifying colonial systems, structures, and relationships within our institutions and actively working to challenge them. Our current curriculum reflects and maintains the idea that white Western ideologies are not only superior, but also universal in thought. Even with the incorporation of non-white intellectuals, they are still treated as challengers of the mainstream and not independent thinkers who demand response. So how do we decolonize our curriculum? First, we must acknowledge that knowledge is not owned by any one person, race, or culture. Everybody, no matter race, ethnicity, gender, culture, sexual orientation, or disability, should have equal access to knowledge and education. Second, we must consider how different educational frameworks, traditions, and knowledge interact with each other. This includes recognizing that multiple voices need to be heard to form new perspectives to mutual learning. Third, we must discuss how students experience the curriculum differently. Most students have different backgrounds and have witnessed or been part of injustices. Bringing these experiences into the classroom and discussing them helps decolonize the current Eurocentric curriculum. Lastly, we must openly discuss with students about the injustices and trauma that oppression brings and break the political neutrality of classrooms. Many teachers believe that staying neutral is the right option, but when teachers are neutral, they allow the marginalization to continue. Teachers need to talk about these injustices without sugarcoating them, even if some see it as being political.